Hi, I'm Crystal. Today's Junk Journal July prompt is contrast, and I'm starting out with some ink blending. So the idea behind ink blending is that you really need to have a lot of ink down in order to blend the colors. So I am impatient, and instead of using an ink pad to pick up the ink to blend with, I just went straight to the Distress Oxide reinkers. I put about 7 drops each down into a foam plate to pick up with my blending brush to blend onto the page. Now I did end up going back and having to add a little bit more for the red and the purple. Covers a little bit more ground, but you really get a lot of ink onto the paper really fast this way. I am using mixed media paper with a very light coat of clear gesso, so that is making the ink move around on the paper quite easily. So I did speed this up a little bit in editing, but even in real life with my dithering around and shaking the reinker bottles and blah blah blah, beginning to end the ink blending took 6 minutes. So that is the fastest method of ink blending I think I've ever tried, and I think it really does speed along this process. So because the prompt is contrast, I chose orange for one side of the spread and purple for the other. I blended in the middle with red, but there's quite a bit of contrast there between purple and orange. And then I went with a stamping approach, because stamping is certainly about creating contrast. If you stamp tone on tone, you don't have a lot of contrast. You can't see what you're doing, but anytime you stamp with a different tone, then you've got high contrast and you can see what you're doing. So that was in the spirit of the challenge, and I also tried to use quite a few found materials for the stamping, since this is a junk journal challenge, not a stamping challenge. And since it is a journaling prompt, I've made a spot for journaling at the very end. So now that I've wrapped up the ink blending part, I'm going to do my stamping, and I'm going to start by stamping with water. So because this is a water reactive ink, and it doesn't have to be Distress Oxides if you're doing this. It could be any type of water reactive ink. It reacts with water. I mean, duh, right? So when you stamp with water, it picks up the ink that is there, and you can create some contrast quite easily. So I'm starting with some bubble wrap. Found material. It's just taken out of some packaging. And then I went with a ripped piece of cardboard. I was not too impressed. You didn't really see the texture on that ripped cardboard. And then I went with wine cork. So this happens to be a natural wine cork, but I think an artificial one would work equally well here. And I don't know if you know this about wine corks. They're actually made from tree bark. It's a special tree that's grown in Portugal primarily. And when wine is corked, it's because there is an infection in that natural tree bark. So if you're thinking to yourself, I don't know that I've ever tasted corked wine, you will not be confused if you ever do. It is really nasty. It just tastes off and wrong. So nothing wrong with artificial corks. They get the job done. I also like screw top bottles and boxed wine. Really think that boxed wine is the future, and if you talk to small winemakers, they tend to agree. Wine bottles are expensive, and it's the technology of the 19th century, or the 18th century even, not the technology of the current century. So I think we're going to see some change there. Anyway, I went on to stamping with some acrylic ink using a toilet paper tube. And I like this because obviously when you use acrylic paint on your stamps, you have to be really careful about cleaning them. Not so much with a disposable cardboard stamp. It also worked quite nicely on the wine cork. So I thought that was kind of a fun bit of contrast there as well. So once I've done stamping with water and with ink and with acrylic paint, I am going to do a little bit more of a water technique with a stencil, where I'm just applying water through the stencil and then picking up the ink where the page is wet for a little bit of texture. I did that in a couple places. That's a Tim Holtz stencil called Burlap. And then I'm going to go on to do just a little bit of stamping with a regular stamp. So this is a silicone stamp that I got from a Chinese retailer, discount retailer. But I like it. I like the look of it. There's no way to link to it. So then I went to my opportunity box, which is the extra bits that I got from some earlier project, and I picked out this cathedral window, which is a Big's die that I had cut out of some previous inking, and I'm backing that with a little bit of vellum just to make a pocket, and then that pocket is where I'm going to stick my journaling on this spread. So I certainly enjoyed making this spread, and I hope that you've enjoyed watching the process video. I hope you're enjoying Junk Journal July. I've had a ton of fun doing this, and I really appreciate you joining me today. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks.